Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to be looking at something that I'm sure has crossed all of our minds at some point.
For sure.
How do we reconcile the very real suffering in the world and that we experience and see with this idea of a higher reality, a more perfect reality?
Mm-hmm.
And for this one, you sent over some really fascinating material looking at this through the lens of Vedanta.
Yeah.
Specifically, we're going to be looking at Swami Vivekananda's 1896 London lecture called Seeing God in Everything.
Right.
Which is drawing on the wisdom of this really ancient text called the Isha Upanishad.
That's right.
So I think our mission for this deep dive, if you will, is to try to understand how this philosophy offers a unique way to understand suffering, to understand the nature of reality itself.
Exactly.
And maybe even offer some helpful insights for navigating all the complexities of life.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us are already familiar with this fundamental problem of suffering.
Of course.
The Buddha called it dukkha, and we often hear in different religions that there's a better reality that's waiting for us somewhere else.
Right, like a heaven or something.
But for a lot of people, that doesn't really land.
Yeah.
Because this world that we experience feels more real.
Yeah, for sure.
Than some abstract concept of God or heaven.
Totally. And it can feel dismissive, too. Like, just ignore all this suffering that you're going through.
Yeah, like it's minimizing it.
Right, exactly.
And Vivekananda, he really acknowledged this tension.
Oh, yeah.
He even used the analogy of someone trying to swat a mosquito.
Okay.
And in the process, they end up making a huge mess.
Yeah.
They knock over a vase, they break something.
Right.
And he uses this to illustrate how sometimes the cure can be worse than the disease.
Yeah, and I think we also have this maybe unfair stereotype of like the really deeply religious person.
Right.
And how they can sometimes seem detached from the world.
Yeah.
Joyless even, as if engaging with the world is somehow wrong or impure.
Absolutely. And we even see that with Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita.
Oh, interesting.
He's facing this huge conflict, and initially, he just wants to renounce everything.
Right.
Rather than engage in the suffering.
Wow. Okay, so that's really fascinating, this tension that exists.
Yeah.
And how Vedanta is trying to find a way to speak to that.
Exactly. And that's what makes Vivekananda's approach so interesting.
Okay.
He presents Vedanta as what he calls a rational religion.
Rational religion.
It appeals to both our reason, our intellect, but also to our emotions, to our heart.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, it's something that can really resonate with a modern mind.
Interesting. And, you were mentioning earlier a connection with Albert Einstein.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to hear more about that.
So Einstein, in his personal writings, he actually expressed admiration for Spinoza's idea of God.
Okay.
Not a personal God who intervenes.
Right.
But as this impersonal underlying order of the universe.
Interesting.
He even went as far as calling traditional religious ideas childish superstitions.
Wow.
And Spinoza, in his work, Ethics, he lays out this almost mathematical, logical structure that really resonates with Vedanta, particularly Advaita Vedanta.
Right.
So it makes sense that Vivekananda's very systematic and rigorous approach to spirituality would have resonated with someone like Einstein.
Yeah, totally. So that's a really fascinating connection.
Yeah.
So Vedanta offers this rational framework that's cool.
Right.
But how does it actually address this core issue of suffering and the nature of reality? Because that's the real question here.
Absolutely. And this is where the Isha Upanishad comes in.
Okay.
And particularly a powerful first line.
Okay, remind me.
Isha vasamidam sarvam yad kincha jagatyam jagat.
Yeah, okay.
It means this entire universe is to be covered by God.
Covered by God. That's a really powerful image.
It is.
So how do we understand that in practice? What does that actually mean?
Well, Shankaracharya, who's a great sage, he interpreted Isha as referring to Paramatma, which is the supreme self.
Okay.
The ultimate reality.
Right.
And Vivekananda takes this idea of covering it by God a step further.
Okay.
He says it's not about some external force imposing itself on the world.
Right.
It's about us recognizing that there's already a divine reality present in everything.
Interesting.
It's not wishful thinking.
Okay.
It's not trying to cover up suffering with some spiritual Band-Aid.
Right.
It's about truly seeing what is already there.
That makes sense. I remember reading that Mahatma Gandhi found this line to be really significant.
He did.
Do you remember what he said?
He said that if the whole of Hindu scriptures were to be lost, and all that remained was this one shloka, the essence of Hinduism would still be contained in it.
That's powerful.
Yeah, it's powerful. And for Vivekananda, he saw this as the key to resolving this tension between our everyday experience and the divine.
Instead of trying to escape the world to find God, we're actually invited to see the world as God.
Exactly.
It's a huge shift in perspective.
It is a huge shift.
But how do we even begin to see that way? Like, how do we train ourselves?
Yeah, well, Shankaracharya offers a really helpful analogy.
Okay.
He compares it to sandalwood that has been soaked in water.
Okay.
The outer layer develops this unpleasant smell.
Okay.
But if you keep rubbing it, you go beyond that surface layer.
Yeah.
The sandalwood's inherent fragrance, that beautiful aroma, is revealed.
Okay.
And similarly, the world with all of its imperfections and suffering is like that outer layer.
Okay.
Beneath it is Brahman, the ultimate truth.
Gotcha.
That divine essence just waiting to be uncovered.
So it's not saying that the world is an illusion.
Right.
Like, it doesn't exist at all.
Exactly, because we see this term Jagat Mithya, which can be confusing.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that the world is like a hallucination.
Okay.
Or that it's completely unreal. Right. What it means is that the way we perceive the world is being separate from Brahman.
Oh, I see.
As if it has its own independent reality.
Nope.
That's the illusion.
Gotcha.
That sense of separateness.
Okay.
The divinity isn't somewhere else. It's right here.
Okay.
It's the underlying essence of everything.
That's a big idea.
It is.
You know, and I think Vivekananda cautioned against both extremes here.
He did.
On the one hand, we have this indulgence in worldly pleasures.
Right.
And on the other hand, we have this complete renunciation, like trying to escape the world entirely.
Like complete withdrawal.
And he's saying that's not the way.
Not the way.
The real path is to find that divinity in the midst of it all.
Right here, right now.
So I know we talked about the analogy of the sandalwood, which I really like. But you mentioned that Vivekananda also used other analogies.
Yes, he did.
And one that comes to mind is this idea of gold ornaments.
Exactly.
Can you unpack that one a little bit?
So he uses this really simple example
of
gold necklaces and bracelets.
Okay.
So imagine like a young child.
Okay.
They might be fascinated by the different forms and shapes.
Yeah.
They don't understand that it's all fundamentally gold.
Right.
So the parent would say, look, it's all gold, just in different forms.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
In the same way, we tend to get caught up in all the different names and forms in the world, and we miss the underlying reality, which is Brahman.
Yeah.
And he even tells this story about a businessman who goes to pawn a statue of Ganesha along with this little mouse vehicle. And the businessman gets upset because the pawnbroker offers him the same amount. For both of them.
For Ganesha and the mouse?
Yeah. And the pawnbroker just says, look, it's all gold to me.
I love that.
So the idea is that clinging to those forms, those external appearances, leads to sorrow, to attachment.
Right.
But recognizing that underlying essence, that divine essence that permeates it all, offers us a different way of looking at things.
I'm starting to see how if we can see God in everything, it changes the whole idea of renunciation.
It does.
It's not about giving up on life.
Right.
It's about seeing it with new eyes.
Exactly.
Renunciation in this context isn't about abandoning your family.
Right.
Or your job.
Or the things you enjoy.
Yeah. It's about finding the divine within them.
In your spouse, your children.
Your colleagues' nature.
Yeah, the source even mentions the Indian tradition of naming children after deities.
Right.
As a way to remember this.
Right. That's fascinating.
And Vedanta speaks of Satchidananda.
Okay.
Which is existence, consciousness, and bliss.
Okay.
As the fundamental reality that underlies all these names and forms.
Right.
So that second line of the Isha Upanishad, Tena Tetena Buchita, which means protect this insight through renunciation.
Okay.
It's really about holding on to that understanding, that inner vision.
I love that. So we've talked about the shift in perspective. How does that connect back to suffering and the role of desire?
Yeah, this is where things get even more profound.
Okay.
The Buddha famously taught that desire, or trishna, is the root of suffering, of dukkha.
Okay.
We're constantly chasing after things we think will make us happy, avoiding things we dislike, creating this endless cycle of dissatisfaction. But if Brahman is the sole reality and our true self, Atman is identical to Brahman.
Right.
God alone is everything. I myself am everything.
Right.
What are we really lacking?
Yeah.
Desire as this seeking of something outside ourselves
right.
starts to dissolve when we realize that we already are what we're seeking.
That's such a powerful idea.
It is a powerful idea.
And I remember the source mentioning a story about a princess.
Yeah.
What was that?
It's the story of the Princess of Kashi.
Okay.
So there's this prince who, in a childhood play, had played the role of a princess. Years later, he falls deeply in love with a portrait of a princess.
Okay.
Completely unaware that it's a portrait of himself.
Wow.
And eventually, a wise minister reveals the truth.
Okay.
Tatamase, that thou art.
Wow.
You are the princess. There's nothing external to your own being that you truly desire.
Wow. And so how does that connect back to this idea?
Well, Vivekananda suggests that this world is our princess of Kashi.
I see.
The Upanishad reinforces this idea with the line, Magrida kasesvi dhanam, which means, do not covet, for whose is wealth.
Wow.
Because ultimately everything belongs to Brahman.
Right.
Which is our own deepest self.
That is so powerful.
Yeah.
So if we can really internalize this idea of oneness, it must lead to a fundamentally different way of experiencing life's ups and downs.
It does.
And this is where that concept of samadrishti comes in.
Exactly. Evenness of vision.
Right.
So just like we recognize that the bangle and the necklace are both made of gold, we can see the divine present in both happiness and in misery.
Okay.
And this leads to samadrishti, this evenness of vision.
Okay.
The sharp edges of what we perceive as good and bad start to soften.
Interesting.
We start to see a deeper harmony.
Okay.
Even in those challenging moments.
Yeah.
And we can understand those joyous moments within a larger, more encompassing context.
That's beautiful.
It is. And this is what true renunciation really is.
Right.
It's not about constantly chasing after the fleeting promises of the world,
Right.
but resting in the ever-present, unchanging, divine reality within.
I love that.
Vivekananda, he has this beautiful quote.
Okay.
He says that we often live right next to this ocean of nectar.
Okay.
And yet we suffer from thirst.
Yeah.
Simply because we believe ourselves to be separate from it.
Wow. So does all of this mean that we should just withdraw from the world?
No, not at all.
Oh.
It actually means the opposite.
Okay.
The person who has realized this, who's free from the anxieties and attachments of the ego, they work from a place of fulfillment.
Okay.
With a desire to be a blessing to the world.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
You know, Isha Upanishad itself says, Kurvaneva hakarmani jijibishet satam sama.
Yeah.
Which basically means live a full life of 100 years, engaging in work, but with this vision.
This higher vision.
And how did Vivekananda translate that?
He translates that beautifully as, your life will be a blessing untainted by karma.
Untainted by karma.
It's action, but imbued with wisdom and detachment.
I see. So, you know, reading through the source material, I noticed a subtle difference in how Shankaracharya and Vivekananda interpret this, the second mantra.
Right.
While they both really respect that first mantra's emphasis on seeing the divine everywhere, they have a little bit of a different view on the second one. So Shankaracharya saw a bit of a distinction there.
Okay. Suggesting different paths.
Okay.
For those who have attained enlightenment versus those who are still on the path.
Okay.
He advocated for karma mukti, which is gradual liberation through Vedic rites and purification.
Okay.
Vivekananda, on the other hand, he saw a more unified message throughout, advocating for sati mukti, which is immediate liberation.
Interesting.
Possible right here. Right now.
Okay.
Through the realization of this fundamental oneness.
So let's move on a little bit.
Sure.
Because the Upanishad goes on to describe Brahman in what seem like contradictory terms, saying it both moves and doesn't move.
Right.
How do we even wrap our minds around that?
Yeah, so the fourth mantra says, Tariyati tanajati.
Okay.
It moves not.
It moves not.
It's described as being faster than the mind.
Okay.
Yet completely still.
Okay.
It surpasses those who run after it, yet it remains unmoved.
Yeah, it's confusing.
It can be confusing. It's a bit of a paradox.
It is.
Think of it like electricity.
Okay.
Powering the appliances in your home.
Okay.
The electricity itself isn't visible.
Right.
But it's what animates all those devices. Similarly, consciousness, which is Brahman, is the underlying reality of all of our experiences.
I see.
Our senses, our thoughts might be racing.
Yeah.
But Brahman itself is all-pervading and unchanging.
It's like the lake analogy.
Exactly.
The water is still, but the reflections are moving.
Right. It's both incredibly close to us.
Okay.
Closer than our own thoughts.
Yeah.
But also seemingly infinitely distant
Okay.
to those who are caught up in external appearances.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So why is it that we often don't perceive this?
Right, if it's so close, if it's everywhere.
Yeah, why don't we see it?
Well, the third mantra offers a warning.
Okay.
It speaks of these demonic worlds,
Okay.
shrouded in darkness,
Yeah.
that are the destiny of those who remain ignorant of their true self.
Okay.
Now, this isn't necessarily about, like, literal hell realms.
Okay.
It's more about the cycle of birth and death.
Okay.
That constant striving and suffering that can feel so meaningless.
Yeah.
It's like there's this classic analogy of mistaking a rope for a snake in dim light.
Right.
The reality is there,
Right.
but our misperception
Yeah.
leads us to see something that's not really there.
It's like we're creating our own suffering.
In a way, yes.
So this all sounds very profound, but the source material acknowledges that living this ideal consistently is really challenging.
Of course it is challenging.
Hey, can we really do this?
Well, Vivekananda, he was very practical.
Yeah.
He even quoted Shankaracharya, who said that even scholars of Vedanta could still be seen acting on their base desires.
Right.
It's so easy to fall back into old patterns.
Yeah.
And Vivekananda himself said, a man with an ideal makes fewer mistakes.
That's good.
So it's about effort, about striving.
Okay.
It's remembering these teachings.
Okay.
Contemplating them, reasoning about them.
Right.
And embodying them through practice.
Like what kind of practice?
Well, things like studying scriptures.
Okay.
Listening to devotional music.
Yeah.
Or engaging in prayer and meditation.
Okay.
And as Krishna tells us in the Bhagavad Gita, even a little effort on this path can protect us from deeper fear and suffering.
So it's a journey, not a destination.
Exactly. A continuous process of refinement.
I like that.
Yeah.
And the aim of this journey, as we see in the later mantras, is this profound sense of oneness and liberation.
Absolutely. That's the ultimate goal.
And how do these mantras describe that?
Well, the 6th and 7th mantras say, Yastu sarvani bhutani admani vanupashyati, which means he who sees all beings in the self, and the self in all beings, does not hate.
Does not hate. That's powerful.
It is. And in that realization of interconnectedness, delusion and sorrow vanish.
Wow.
We truly recognize our unity with all of existence. The ego dissolves. And we're liberated from the burden of praise and blame.
That's freedom.
True freedom.
And it seems like Vivekananda had a specific way of interpreting the later parts of the Upanishad.
He did, yeah.
Were there any differences from Shankaracharya?
So Shankaracharya often outlined different paths in the later verses, sometimes including specific ritualistic practices. Vivekananda, on the other hand, he saw this unified call to enlightenment woven throughout the whole text.
Interesting.
And he interpreted that 9th mantra that talks about darkness as a warning against both excessive indulgence and escapist renunciation.
Not either extreme.
Exactly. Find that middle path.
I like that.
And for Vivekananda, the Upanishad really culminates in that powerful declaration.
Which one?
Soham asmai, which means I am that.
I am that.
And it's echoed in that concluding Shanti mantra that beautifully conveys this idea that the infinite wholeness remains infinite, even after the universe arises from it. And we are part of that infinity.
So much to unpack there.
There is.
But let's bring it back down to earth a little bit. Because I think our listeners are probably wondering, how do we start? What's the first step?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Like, how do we actually start to see God in everything?
Well, Vivekananda offers a simple starting point. If it feels overwhelming to try to see the divine in absolutely everything, start with one thing, one person. Maybe it's Krishna or Christ or a loved one. And try to see that spark of the divine within them. And the source mentions this really touching story about Gopal's mother, who, after developing deep devotion to the infant Krishna, started seeing that same innocence, that same divinity in everyone she met.
Wow.
And that vision really moved Vivekananda. And the key takeaway here is that liberation isn't something that's going to happen in the future. It's a present reality.
Here and now.
It's waiting to be recognized.
And it's like that old monastic declaration. You are God.
Whether you believe it or not.
Powerful stuff.
It is. And the universe in this light is nothing less than the Lord's poetry.
Oh, Lord's poetry. That's beautiful.
It is.
So really what we're being invited to do is to shift our perspective.
To see with new eyes.
And to peel back that surface layer.
And recognize that inherent divinity.
That's within us and all around us.
Yeah, as Vivekananda so beautifully articulated in his interpretation of the Isha Upanishad.
So to our listeners, here's something to think about.
Okay.
Take a moment. Consider one aspect of your life right now. Maybe it's a challenging relationship.
Okay.
Or a goal that you're working towards.
Yeah.
Or even just a moment of beauty.
A moment of awe.
And try to see the gold beneath the ornament.
That underlying essence.
What changes in your perception when you look for that unity?
Yeah, that's a great question to ponder.
And if you found this deep dive interesting, we encourage you to explore the Isha Upanishad and the teachings of Vivekananda.
There's so much wisdom there.
And as always, we'll be back next time with another deep dive.
Until then,
thanks for listening.
Take care.
Bye.